when I went out on a date with him. First date, he's telling me how like almost every ex-girlfriend that he had was a nurse. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a whole thing. Like firefighters and nurses.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking like, I am not a nurse. I think I should just check myself out. Welcome to the Emily and Todd Podcast. Today we are talking about types when it comes to dating. Before we get started, please comment and like on the video as it does really help with the YouTube algorithm. So Todd, I feel like when we talk about certain types with dating, there's a few different aspects that people think of. One of that is like physical features.
Sure.
A lot of people fall into dating the same looking person.
Yes.
But then there's other things too.
Well, I think the first one that kind of comes to my mind is a personality type. So, for example, if somebody is, more dominant, then most likely in order to find somebody that is a good fit for them, they probably would have to have somebody who's a little bit more passive, the kind of the yin and the yang of that. And I think that most people who have had some insight would understand that kind of about themselves. I mean, ideally, everybody would, be healthy and be in a place where it would be completely equal. But the reality is that some people just have stronger personalities than others.
Yeah, and I feel like it challenges you. Like if you're an introvert and you're dating an extrovert, it does actually, like in a positive way, it forces you to get out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
So
and we naturally kind of mimic some of our partner's behaviors. So it's something that it rubs off on you, so to speak.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
But it goes beyond that also, of course. And, and it's not just kind of the way that person looks or their personality, but a lot of times it has to do with the fact that they have certain career paths that they go on. I think people develop, like I'm going to be interested in that person because of the fact that they have the characteristics that are within that type.
I totally see that. And the one that comes to mind is I've heard from different men that like they love to date nurses or teachers. And I think that's exactly right. Like there's an assumption made that is probably pretty true most of the time that is a very like a little bit more submissive woman that is caring and nurturing. But the other one that I think of is women that love to date cops or firefighters, right? And I feel like I can speak to that because my ex was a police officer. And I get it in many ways how, especially at a young age, it's like guys can become cops and gain like quite a bit of power at a young age, at like 19, which is crazy to me, really, when you think about it. But that can be very intriguing for a woman that's around that same age.
What's the old saying? A woman loves a man in uniform.
In uniform, yeah.
Right? But why is that? And I think that it has a lot to do with protection and being strength. I could see that be very, very attractive to women. Where, for example, I don't think most guys are attracted to female cops.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
It doesn't go the same way.
The same way.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think it is that protection piece. And it's such an easy way. Like once you hear a man is in that position, you just can assume those things about him. And it's not to say that somebody that is not in that job position would not also have potentially the same exact like masculine energy, because that's definitely out there. But I can see how women can develop this type because it's like a fast pass. She knows that he is these things.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, the reality, though, is that when you're in a profession, you could be very different than when you're at home. So that's something that can trick people up as well. But we're mainly talking about kind of initial attraction, people getting in the door. We're not really talking specifically about individuals or their personalities, but more kind of globally.
Yes. And I think when we talk about it, it is based on a lot of assumptions, right? Because, for example, talking about the woman that's attracted to the cop, she probably doesn't realize what life is like as the wife or the spouse of a police officer, right? And the ins and outs of that and the difficulty and negatives of that. But that's kind of a whole nother topic. That's
Yes.
the whole thing is that you have a lot of assumptions with types.
Yes.
So, which might be wrong. A lot of them might be right, but a lot of them might be wrong.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because on different social media platforms too, you have these stereotypes that are a lot of times reinforced.
Oh, yes. The other one that I hear, the combination that I hear a lot about is nurses with firefighters.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, they come to contact with each other. That's the thing.
And I get that.
Especially the EMTs, because they're constantly going in and out of the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so they, kind of straight up those relationships.
The first time I heard that was from a guy that was a firefighter. And this was a few years ago when I went out on a date with him. First date, he's telling me how like almost every ex-girlfriend that he had was a nurse. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a whole thing. Like firefighters and nurses.
Okay.
And I'm just thinking like, I am not a nurse. I think I should just check myself out. You know, because there is a lot of strength, I feel like, in types. And like if somebody's holding that belief that they really want to end up with some certain type, like, do you think that they should fight against that? Or is it kind of a balance of figuring out if that's really deep within you? Like, should you just go with it?
I would say at any other time in history, I would kind of say explore that more, but maybe kind of stick to that because that's something that at a different point in time you probably could have found someone that met those requirements and that you really connected with. But I think we're in the midst of a dating crisis right now, a mating crisis, I should say. And because of that, I think the healthy thing to do would be to expand what you see as your type and say to yourself, I should be more open-minded, because like right now, like a lot of guys might be watching this and saying, dude, like I can't even get a date. Like, well, I'm not worried about a nurse.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And so I think it's one of those things where we have to say, like, as a strategy to solve some of these issues, and obviously it's very complex and multi-layered, but one of the potential solutions would say, I have to look outside my type, and that might be maybe even looking outside this country.
Yeah. Right. That I feel like that's like the ultimate, right? Because then you're stepping into possibly like a location that you've never been to.
Yes.
You're talking about a different culture. And, you're talking about a different look. Yes.
Maybe your type was somebody that you felt like had to have this like certain look, for example, or a certain race. It's uncomfortable to talk about sometimes, but the reality is that I think that my personal belief is that there's attractive people in every race.
I agree.
So it's like, why would you just date within your race, for example?
Yes. And I think that a lot of that has to do with media, right? And like what we are shown to be beautiful. And I think that the world is definitely changing and it's getting better at showing us people that look different. And so we can almost like feel that attraction, especially when it's some like superstar. I know you were talking about one yesterday that like if that really attractive man who is a different race from what you typically date, but you see him and like you see him in the movie and you're attracted to him, like that does shift your mindset a bit to even be open to somebody in your real life being of that same race.
Yes, absolutely. Race and culture. It's one of those things where I think we all really have more in common than we have different.
Yes.
So it's really trying to find that connection. And yes, there can be cultural things that you have to overcome, but that can also be an opportunity to learn about someone else's culture and teach you about theirs.
Yeah, I think that's what's key is to be open, right? Like if you're pretty closed-minded, and especially if you're like just starting out in the dating world and you're young, like I think it's hard for that type of person to truly be open to dating outside of their type. I think this is something that kind of evolves in time, especially if you're not having success, and you just think I need to do something different maybe.
But if there's any young guys watching, for example, the quicker you can kind of get past that, the better results you're going to have long term. It's saying that, okay, I'm 21 years old and don't have a lot of experience dating, and but I'm only interested in blue-eyed, blonde-haired women, which I've heard a lot of 21-year-old guys say.
Many
that exact sentiment. But the reality is that although that's great, it doesn't mean that that's all you can be attracted to. Yeah. I guarantee that you feel this way without even asking you, but that people can be more attractive when you like their personality.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Right?
Yes. I think women especially function that way. I have always functioned that way, that once you become attracted to somebody's personality, it's almost as if anything they do or anything that they have physically, trait-wise, is attractive. And I think sometimes if that's what carries us into a type, right? So like our first couple of relationships, I think that like a lot of times it's those kind of features that we carry through and we look for. Sometimes that can be a bad thing, right?
I think part of that comes with maturity as well. Because I think when you hear these women saying they want this list of things, how many of these women are in their 30s that are saying this, or 40s?
It depends, because I feel like there's a lot of like post-divorce women that are in that age range that have a list.
They still have a list?
That have a list.
Wow.
I do think so.
See, this is why Thailand looks so good.
Yeah.
For potentially, because the women in Thailand don't have lists.
Well, this is the thing, because there are so many options for these women, even when they are in their 30s or 40s. I mean, if they have taken care of themselves, especially, they're going to have a lot of options out there. And so I get it. But I think where women should be motivated to take this perspective and maybe look outside of their type, especially their physical type, is that is not what matters. The physical traits, they really do not matter. Especially women, will become attractive to a man if he has the right qualities, especially personality-wise. So like as long as they realize that about themselves, because I think a lot of women don't, and that's why they fall into the trap of just going for the 6-foot tall guy with dark hair, dark eyes. And instead, they really highlight the things that are most important to them, their personality, whether they're an introvert or extrovert, kind of what balances them the best. Those are the guys that they should go for, no matter what his physical features are, necessarily.
I disagree with that a little bit. I think ideally for both genders, it's a pass-fail type of deal. So you have to say to yourself, okay, does this person pass as far as attractiveness? And if they don't, it's really difficult to get to those other areas.
But I disagree, because I think there's that maybe category, right? That women hold. I
was just thinking about like the person's appearance.
Yes.
From a guy's perspective, the way I honestly think we look at things is they either pass or they fail.
Yes.
And they may only pass by 65, but at the same time, I think if they pass, then it's something that you get to the point where you really dig into the other aspects of their life. But if they fail, I don't think that most guys or women, especially women nowadays, are going to even give that guy a shot. And that's where I really believe that self-improvement and leveling up and looks maxing and
that matters.
All that stuff matters, because it's something that we have to be the best version of ourselves in order to attract somebody that we're attracted to.
Yes, I agree with that last piece. And I totally agree with like men having a yes/no category. I feel like I constantly hear that feedback from men. I just think that even with physical traits and how a man looks, women still have a maybe category. I really do think so. Like, I mean,
how does that work though in the dating app age?
So I think that there are less women on dating apps, right? So we have to keep that in mind than men. But for the women that are on dating apps, like I think it does skew their judgment a bit, and it does highlight the physicalness of everything.
Yes.
And
especially if they're being successful in matching.
Exactly. So I think for those women that are on dating apps, like absolutely they're falling into that trap of having more so a yes/no category, because they're literally faced with that decision right off the bat when they go to swipe.
Yeah. If we look at the data, so men swipe about 50-50, and maybe that's the line. Maybe that's the pass-fail. But maybe it's because of the fact that that wasn't somebody that normally you might be attracted to because of the fact that they were a different race or culture than
Right.
yourself. So I think it's one of those things where I think it can be helpful for men too to say to themselves, okay, like I'm not going to just swipe on the top people. Actually, if there's somebody who's really attractive and you're not in that ballpark, I mean, think about hypergamy. It's a real thing. So, swipe on people, be very particular about it, that are around your looks range, but also think about trying different countries, think about trying different races of people, and actually sit down and spend some time with them. You may think differently of them.
Yeah.
I can say that from my own personal experience, that when I was younger, I was really more focused on dating Caucasian women, because that's when I grew up around, so I went to college with on the most part. And that, it's kind of 90% of the people that I interacted with.
It's like what you're comfortable with.
Yes. Well, and honestly, it just wasn't something that I had contact with many other different, races of people. But as I've gotten older and I've gotten more exposure, I found that I'm extremely attracted to different people of a lot of different races. And so it's something that, and to this point now where I actually prefer that. So, but I didn't come to that realization until I was a little older, and I also gave it a shot.
Right. And then what did you find? Was it just like really
was
way
like-
more interesting?
Yeah, it was something that was so different, but in a positive way, that it was something that I said, I don't know if I could ever go back. It's just to the uptight suburban white woman. You know what I mean?
I would think that. I mean, especially with the conversations that you'd have. I mean, if you're coming from whole different locations and coming from different cultures, just the discussions that you'd have would be way more rich.
Yes.
I would think.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that it would potentially enrich each other's lives to be able to talk about the culture and to learn about that. And, and I've worked with couples that were, different races. And although there's challenges, of course, but typically I didn't see the biggest challenge being something that they had different cultures. It was more interpersonal.
Yeah, I could see that. So what do you think holds men back specifically from trying this?
Well, I think there's, some obvious barriers, like, for example, just, the money that it costs to go do that. The fact that if, there might be a chance where, because maybe the woman's so entrenched with their family, that the guy may choose to, in order to be in that relationship, to have to move there.
That's a huge change. That's huge sacrifices.
Yes, it is. But it's something that if you want your own family potentially, then, you might have to put that on the table.
I think there's other things that probably hold men back from being open to this because of what their family would think. Or I think culture is getting better, honestly. But there might be some areas still, within the Western world that would judge it a little bit. But I think it still goes to having an open mind and really deciding what you want is important and not caring so much about what other people think.
Yeah, because nobody really cares anyways.
Right. Everyone always thinks that people care so much about like other people's lives.
Yeah, they don't.
They really don't.
They don't. They're too focused on themselves.